So the first thing is, if you want to have a great impact on your team, you got to go inside yourself. The greatest impact you're going to have on others is by having greater clarity of who you are, how you want to show up, and doing the inner work that brings out the best of you. Well, the best of you is going to impact others a lot better than the worst of you trying to change them.
Hi, I'm Derik Mills. Welcome to the Glo Podcast. Elazar Aslan's views on leadership may make you question how you define what it means to be a leader. A business consultant, entrepreneur, executive advisor, and co-author of the new book, Boundless Leadership, he has found that effective leadership is really about what is going on inside the leader. As a leader, you must be willing to lead yourself into a never-ending journey of optimizing your inner condition. He admits that not every leader is willing to do that sort of intense inner work. As he said in our interview, the deeper reason that most of us don't want to do the inner work is because we spend so much time packing that stuff into a box and putting the box in a closet and locking the closet with chains. His work with business clients, and also the focus of his book, is to help us feel safe enough in life to flip from wanting to change others to wanting to change ourselves, and to pivot away from traditional stress-fueled leadership styles to a kind of leadership that focuses on co-creating psychologically safe and meaningful relationships at work. This interview is a companion piece to my interview with Dr. Joe Loizzo, who co-wrote Boundless Leadership with Elazar. You can find a link to my interview with Joe on the Glo website at glo.com/podcast. And we'll also put a link to it in the show notes for this episode. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Elazar Aslan. Hi, Elazar. So wonderful to be here with you today, and I'm so excited about this conversation.
Thank you, Derik. Thank you for having me. I too am looking forward to sharing this information and seeing where it goes.
Yeah.
Before we start, actually, Derik, what might be helpful for me is to understand why you started these podcasts. Like, what's your interest or intention behind that?
So I started Glo, which was Yoga Glo initially back in 2008. And so we've been at this now for a while. And
yeah,
over the years, I would come across very interesting people, sometimes quite eccentric people. And I'd have these conversations that I often thought, I should have captured that. Like, that would have been really cool. Like, if maybe not the whole thing, but like nuggets here and there, if people heard them, not only would it help maybe shed some light on some of my worldview and how I, ideas that I respect and want more and more people to know about, but that it would highlight some people that maybe are not necessarily famous or have a lot of likes or social followers. And so it's something I've wanted to do for a long time. And I have a bunch of excuses. One of which addicted to kind of being busy, and so many other things that I allowed for my own sense of self-worth and adequacy, allowed being wrapped up with being in certain work streams or being parts of certain processes. And that would probably be the biggest excuse as to why I never got around to it. And so I've also wanted Glo to address much broader issues as it pertains to how to be a better human. And our future content direction is heading that way. So I was introduced to the word yoga in a college philosophy class where we studied parts of Rig Veda, various Upanishads, the whole Bhagavad Gita, and some other texts that people don't normally hear about. And I was introduced to yoga as really a process of virtuosity in being oneself. And there's a pretty big gap between that and how the word yoga and even mindfulness is understood today. And so given that, I always imagined that Glo would address and teach with much greater precision, a broader set of skills and competencies that support well-being for those looking for guidance on the journey of a deeper understanding of oneself, addressing emotional and psychological health. So that's where we're heading, and we wanted the podcast to be the beginning of that. And we've been self-funded all these years, and so this is really the beginning of that. On our podcast, Lisa and I have been testing different topics to see relative performance between episodes. And what we're seeing is that our listeners seem to benefit from guests who are authorities or subject matter experts who are sharing information and actionable advice, all under the heading of health and wellness or well-being in general. But me in particular, I have very strong resonance with the material that you and Dr. Loizzo wrote about. And it's very personal for me because I know what it's like to have been part of creating a very toxic workplace culture. And having gone through that journey of learning that trying to change others didn't work. And so getting to that point of despair and a major dead end, realized that only by addressing my interior life, my own unaddressed stuff, would there be any possibility for systemic, cultural, organizational change. And I've learned that that can be done in parallel with organizational change. It's going to take a long time, along with a lot of patience and compassion, but it's worth it.
Absolutely.
As a side note, I don't know if we'll include any of this in the interview, but maybe we will. I first read, I don't know if you have heard of Fred Kaufman.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
I first read Conscious Business, I think back in 2009 or 2010.
Right.
And my very ineffective method of leadership at the time, because as I told myself at the time, I was too busy being sleep deprived, getting stuff done. The underlying subconscious inner narrative was saying in part, there's no time for anything other than answering customer support tickets, doing product development, paying bills, things like editing video, cleaning the floors, all the things, just whatever needed tending to. So I would simply hand out that book and say, please read this. Let's try to be like this together, in so many words. And so it wasn't until much later where we'd operationalized like who we want to be and how we want to be, and set up all the systems and processes that support that way of being and core values, and all the end-to-end people ops stuff, from a well-structured onboarding to offboarding to exit interview and everything in between. And so I have firsthand experience with how extremely difficult this is, but also how incredibly rewarding it is when you can get to a point where you're working with people, not from, as you say, that stress reactivity state, but rather more in a flow state. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of supporting and scaling that. And there's always exciting opportunity for cultural improvement and iteration as a team. But I'm very proud of the changes we're making and the direction that we're heading in. So back to the process of pivoting away from a culture of stress reactivity and moving towards flow. You and Dr. Loizzo spend about 250 pages unpacking what that means, along with practices and how to get there,
Right.
and how to be in that never-ending process, that there is no final endpoint. It's just being in the ring, rumbling together and all trying
Right.
to contribute positively. So anything you want to ask about that before I kind of move into my introduction? And
Well, no, I actually first want to thank you for your awareness and your courage. It's unfortunately, it's still a pioneering field, and certainly was in 2009. So to be able to say, I see something different and I'm going to try it, even if the trying was, I'm going to read this book and hand it out, still a step in the right direction. So, thank you for that. This idea that we're going to change things by changing others is something that's ingrained in us. So it's not a intuitive thing to do differently, right? But you don't have to run a business to know you can't really change it. All you need is a partner in your life, and you realize very quickly you're not going to change them so easily. So this idea of being in any kind of a relationship, and of course, business is nothing other than a form of structured relationships, and getting the understanding that you can get to where you want to get to by changing your focus. And it's a flip. In my work with my clients, I just talk about a series of flips. They're all flips. They're big flips and small flips, but we kind of got it, as we grow up in a confused way of how it works. So the first thing is, if you want to have a great impact on your team, you got to go inside yourself. The greatest impact you're going to have on others is by having greater clarity of who you are, how you want to show up, and doing the inner work that brings out the best of you. Well, the best of you is going to impact others a lot better than the worst of you trying to change them, right? And we end up with the worst of us when we're trying to change them because they resist the change. When they resist the change, we just push harder. When we push harder, we start being an us and them because they don't want to change, and we're just pushing really hard and angry that they're not changing. Okay, well, that's just not going to work too well, right?
No.
And unfortunately, because we're so conditioned in our upbringing that that's what we should do, no matter what the data said, our personal experiences, we just don't give up that strategy. It's just we get rid of the people because they're not changing. It's them, so that's, one insight.
And then it all reoccurs with the next round of people.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. In your book, from the beginning, you go to, you mentioned earlier, going inside oneself. And there's early on, you say, that this work, i.e. boundless leadership and being in the process that you introduce in your book is not predicated upon more skills or better command of business principles, but rather upon an unrelenting pursuit of optimizing the inner conditions, the way of being, underlying our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And not everyone wants to talk about the inner conditions in a business environment.
I'm glad you bring that about the book, Derik, because, the book was structured on a program. The program is about change. So the book is really about a very methodical approach to change. And it's focused on not just your mind as a leader, but your mind, your heart, and your body. And inside of each one of these disciplines are particular traits we want to build, like self-awareness for the mind, authentic engagement for the heart, embodied flow for the body. And underneath of those are competencies, and each of the competencies are broken down into 4 qualities, and each of the qualities have very precise practices. And in each discipline is a very particular application, like empowered responsibility is the discipline of heart. So the idea is for you to change. The idea is for you methodically, step by step, show up at work or show up at home a different way, in a way that suits you and serves you and those around you, but also to have these applications you could use right off the bat once you have some deeper understanding, practices you use on a daily basis. And so we're really proud because we've seen it impact people's lives. And we call it boundless leadership so that you're free of your limitations, your self-imposed false beliefs. That's what makes you boundless. But the word leadership, I just want to be clear, is every one of us is a leader of self, right? Every one of us leads ourselves in our lives, who we are, that we're being a leader of me. So it's the same principles, whether you're that or leader of a 10,000 person organization. And having seen people's lives change, it's like we got to get the book out. That's really what was the impetus behind it, completely that.
So I'm curious how, in your work as a coach, how do you invite people who might not want to go to the realm of the interior life or address inner demons, as you say in your book, to create change, to help them navigate all of that. And before you answer that, can you share with us your background and the kinds of people and companies you work with?
Sure, happy to. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am and where that is. I started my career in a very classic way. I got my MBA. I went to Fortune 50 companies, Kraft Foods and American Express, and then ADP. That's a span about 12 years. And my thought was I wanted to be close to the center of gravity because that's where decisions are made and you could have a lot of influence. But then I realized over that decade that really the C-suite that is where the center of gravity is a lot more accessible from the outside by consultants and agencies than it is really on the inside from the, employees, certainly, managers, manager levels. And so I went and created my own agency, my own marketing consulting firm, and I had much more access to the C-level and senior executives of the companies I was working with. And that's when I realized that the limiting factor, of course, we know that the leader has a lot to do with where the company goes, right? That's what leadership's all about. But what I didn't realize until I was working so closely with all these leaders is that the limiting factor, the governor where the company goes, is the inner demons of the leader. It's not the leader's school, not their MBAs, not their previous experience. Those things are factors. But the real core limiting factor is their own limiting beliefs, their own coping mechanisms, their own, issues with things that aren't sitting well with themselves. And as leaders, they have this margin of error to take it out on others. We talked, right before about this idea of, well, if it doesn't work because the employee isn't doing what you want and you can't change him, you just fire him and start all over again. And, it was actually a very fundamental meeting. I remember to this day when I was working with a client as a consultant, and he was looking for support through his HR system. What kind of HR rules do we set up? Because these people aren't working. And I was thinking, well, they're not working for you over and over again, so maybe they're not the problem. I didn't know how to say that at the time, but I realized, okay, how do we solve that problem? If I wanted to be at the core of the center of gravity, then it's really about helping these individuals see their own limiting beliefs, their own biases, the things that makes them not as successful as they could be. Let me help them work on that. So that's what I do now. I work with individual business people, executives, and I work with actual companies as a whole, in their departments. So some of it is coaching. Some of it is programs, put in a sort of step-by-step, multi-month program inside of an organization. Because I also want to share with you the flip side. As this whole conscious business, mindful leadership movement gains steam, there are quite a few companies out there whose leaders are mindful and conscious and want to have their organizations be like that. And they are also limited in having their employees and their whole company think the way they do. So to your point, Derik, of not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody wants to do it, even when the leader's saying, this is what we're going to do. Still, not everybody wants to do it, right? So your question of how do I work with my clients, because if the real change is from within and people don't want to go within, then how do you bring about the change? So one major way that I address that is when I work with my clients, I let them know that, issues come at three levels. There's the on the surface, there's below the surface, and then there's on the ocean floor. Above the surface is usually where the conversation takes place because it's a conversation around actions. What should I do? He said this and she said that, and I need to do this. Those are conversations above the surface. But what really affects those actions are the attitudes and interpretations and the mindset that sits below the surface. And those mindsets, though can be shifted, are fundamentally affected by or conditioned by our core beliefs, our worldview. And what happens is that on the surface is very accessible, and people are very comfortable having conversations on the surface about actions. But you're going to have the same conversation over and over again if you're not addressing some of its causes, which sits below the surface. So let's call that the mindset. The mindset is not as accessible as the logistics, those conversations, but still pretty accessible and can affect the actions. On the ocean floor where your belief sits, that's the root cause of it all. If you can change something from your core belief, you never have to deal with it again because you dealt with it at its root. So as effective and as powerful as that is, it's not so accessible. It's like deep sea diving, and not everybody is a scuba diver. So where the optimal place to work, where the accessibility and the impact are at its highest level, is below the surface. Actions are very accessible, but they're not enough because you're going to repeat your patterns. Below the surface gives you a lot of leeway, and you can actually change the options that are available. And it takes a little bit of work, but it's doable. And if necessary, and if you're able, and if you're willing, there are times you can touch the ocean floor because it's the client that says, oh my God, I've been doing this all my life. I did this in 8th grade. You know, when they bring that up, they're bringing up a core belief. So I steer them towards below the surface where the mindset is something we can play with. They steer me to the ocean floor when they want. And, you know, we then work with wherever it's doable. I just want to be clear, because I don't want to suggest that one is good and one is bad. You know, actions take place above the surface, and without actions, it's all just talk. So you do need to have those conversations. The mindset really drives your action. So without going there, you're really handicapping yourself at a great level. And if you ever want to uproot it, go to the, you know, ocean floor. But there's not to say that you really need to only be in one place. You really should touch all as is accessible to you. And the last thing I would say is most of us don't want to do inner work because most of us have not been trained that that's where the gold is. So that's one reason we don't want to do inner work. So that's just a resetting of expectations and understanding. But the deeper reason that most of us don't want to do inner work is because we spend so much time, you know, packing the stuff in a box and putting the box in a closet and locking the closet with chains. Why the hell would we want to go there, right? So the fundamental reason that many of us don't want to do the inner work is to say, oh, that's to be hidden. So it's really critical that in any kind, and it's really true for any relationship, but certainly in a coaching relationship, that there's a sense of safety. There's a sense of safety that the client can go, I won't be judged when I tell you I'm a coward, you know? And here's a little tip, just to share with your audience, because it takes sometimes years before a client can hear this from me. Whatever client I've ever worked with, and most of them are very successful clients, at some point there's a level of trust. And they kind of whispered to me, Elazar, if you want to know the truth, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this. And I'm going to be found out. And I say to them, I know. Every one of my clients says that. So this idea that you have this dark, oozing, shameful, green-eyed, toxic stuff sitting in your closet, and you think you're the only one with that, that is a misunderstanding. That's a confusion. We all have those closets full of that stuff. And when you put it out, it's never really as bad as you kept thinking it was. Or when you locked it up 20 years ago when you were a kid thinking that nobody should ever know about this. So allowing people to feel safe, to understand that their shameful, dark secrets are really no different than everybody else's shameful, dark secrets. And having the safety that they're not going to be judged takes it a long way. But at the end of the day, the motivation is, it's not working for me the way it is. What do I need to do to make it different, to make it better, to make it lighter, to make it more joyous, less anxiety, less stress, less worry every day? I want to be alive. I want to be free. Open the closet and you will be free. So that motivation on top of the safety and allowing them to go by levels as works for them usually is a good package.
Yeah. I have about a page of notes just as you spoke.
Okay.
I started thinking about Robert Bly's, the American poet, his little book on the human shadow.
Yeah.
He talks about the bag that we all carry. And
yeah,
you're right. When you mentioned the word flips earlier, and I'm curious what you mean by that. When I started to, I don't know, this is what you meant by it. When I started to enter that flip from wanting to change others to wanting to change myself and wanting to go to the ocean floor to find that gold, part of that flip was facilitated by not just the individual work with therapists and coach, but also in group leadership work. And to see, as you said, and I appreciate so much you saying that, because I know for a fact, if someone's wrestling with imposter syndrome or thinking like, I'm going to be found out, and living with that fear day to day, that they're going to be, that hearing that from you is massively helpful. Like when I saw that others are wrestling with some of the very same fears and insecurities and self-doubts that I was wrestling with and still do, just in a less charged way,
right.
that was extremely helpful to be seen and to see others in that way, and to crack myself open in terms of vulnerability and receptiveness or receptivity was key, absolutely key to not only my own personal transformation or beginning of transformation, but also to those around me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you say that, because there's a lot of power, but there's two aspects to that group sharing that you mentioned. One is exactly what you said, which is to find out you're not alone. Okay, so these dark secrets or shameful things or worries that you don't feel you can share with other people, and you hear somebody else sharing and you go, oh my God, you too? I'm not alone. That in itself is freeing. But there's a second aspect that is more subtle and as important, if not more important, in affecting change inside of you. Very few of us tend to really be heard or seen that often. And if you're in a right group setting that is safe, when you share and you're not judged, and people actually, hold you with even greater closeness when you share these, deep secrets, if you will, and you not only are not judged, but are accepted in your most vulnerable, that is incredibly healing. And all this work is nothing other than just healing the wounds that have already been been there. There's nothing other than that. And this is why we go back to what we were saying before. Which one of us has made it to this point without deep wounds somewhere? In a few places, you know? Yeah. So that's all it is. And it's really important to do group work for those reasons we said. But another reason that is related to this healing through acceptance by other is that typically as a society, especially in the West, this isn't as true in the East, though it's not untrue, but it's definitely core to the Western cultural society, is we tend to be our own worst critic. So if we're constantly sitting on our own wounds and saying, come on, what's wrong with you? Let's go again. You know, couldn't you have done that better? Oh my God, she beat you to it. What's wrong? So like we're constantly judging ourselves, trying to push ourselves to better performance. No healing can take place in that. So unfortunately, we don't know how to give it to ourselves, why the group becomes so much more important, because somebody else is able to give it to us, just like we're able to give it to them. We just don't know how to give it to ourselves. So hopefully another thing that happens is not just the healing that takes place there, but the modeling that you can then do with yourself to say, it's okay. It's okay. Nobody's wrong here. Everybody's doing the best they can, and the best just isn't perfect. That's all. Our parents weren't so bad. I mean, maybe they did bad things for whatever reason, but it wasn't like they were mean about it. They just didn't know any better. It's just allowing the physics of an imperfect world to be accepted as a non-personal set of events. Nobody's to blame. We're just there to make it better. So that aspect of healing, which is core for the inside work, really shines in those group settings.
Yeah, and I think you're referring to the types of standard trauma that aren't on the far end of the spectrum, which are just incredibly awful and egregious trauma and incredibly damaging trauma that can be inflicted upon a child, say, for example. I think what you're referring to is more the standard run-of-the-mill traumas that comes with being a human.
Yeah, and unfortunately, not enough of us have escaped the deeper traumas. I mean, it's just whether it's sexual in nature, physical in nature, emotional in nature, that level of abuse does exist. Yeah. And the path of healing tends to be the same, but the margin of error gets tighter, right? If the trauma is deeper. I'll just share very personally, my wife and I adopted some two teenage girls from Colombia who pretty much lived their lives in an orphanage. And working with them to help them feel safe in this world, when you get insight into the level of trauma that they have experienced, it's just mind-boggling. But at the same time, you get such a deep appreciation for the resilience of the human mind and soul, because really we're talking soul here. And to know what it can take and still emerge is just a beautiful thing, just a beautiful thing. So like I said, the process is pretty much the same, just the intensity and the margin of error, the level of professionalism is different. But I do want to say one last thing with it, Derik, just, for many of us, I spend much of my life saying I had great parents. They were not abusive. They didn't put cigarettes out on my back. They didn't leave me in the middle of the night. I had great parents, so I don't have that trauma. So it made it more personal, like what's wrong with me? Because I really didn't have trauma. But the truth of the matter is that, I was reading once some years ago, and it stuck with me, that you lose more water with a dripping sink, with a dripping faucet, than a whole bathtub. In one day, you lose more water than having a whole bathtub full of water. So we do think of major trauma as this bathtub of event that you could point to that's, oh my God, right? But most of us don't have that. But most of us do have leaky faucets that day after day, hour after hour creates a self-view that's just confused. And so we're like kind of walking, thinking north is behind us when north is in front of us, and we just can't understand why we can't get north. And so, hence what we're talking about, just a reorientation.
I love that imagery, the consistently leaking bathtub faucet, that it's highly likely that all of us experience some type of leakage, and the process of being curious about that leakage or multiple leakages and how that impacts our day to day. And going back to your mention of our own worst critic, if I can be more critical and judgmental and harsh on myself and my inner dialogue, then I've accomplished being much more intense or damaging to myself than anyone else ever could be. And so I will have already done the worst in anticipation of whatever external shame and criticism may come.
Yeah. That's a very important point, Derik, because so many of us live with this kind of incessant, harsh inner critic, and we buy it as tough love. So there's two aspects to it. One that you mentioned is, let me immunize myself by getting there before somebody else, right? So I can handle it because I already, was prepared for it. But the second aspect is also kind of powerful, because I've had several clients at some point when we're working on their inner critic, in their own words, say the following things. But if I tame my inner critic, how am I going to get out of bed? My inner critic is what drives me to my success. It's like, I'll probably be some lazy potato couch if I don't have an inner critic pushing me. I'm not sure I want to get rid of my inner critic. He's a secret, or she's a secret to my success. So, we become attached to that pushing to make us go somewhere. And this is an important conversation. We talk about it in the book, because I think both Joe and I see this as a really fundamental discussion for us to understand. And it's a conversation around energy, right? We all need energy to make something happen. It takes energy. And if you're trying to have success in a difficult world, inside of a company, among other people trying to be successful or try and change the world through your organization, it all takes energy. So we need energy. The thing is that most of us have been raised and fueled by the energy that we call fossil fuel, right? So you can't get energy from gas and methane and coal. We do, as a society, get those energies. The issue is that there's always a fallout that cause pollution. They work, but they're not sustainable. They deplete the resources of the earth, but they provide energy. Now, environmentally speaking, there's also renewable energy, clean energy from the sun, from solar, which is sustainable, doesn't deplete the earth, and still provides you with the energy to get done what you need to get done. So on a human level, what that fossil fuel is that fear-based energy that says, I cannot fail. I must succeed. I cannot not be the best because my worth is my performance. So I'll do whatever it takes. That's energy that drives you. Okay? But it's toxic. It's not sustainable. You will burn out. You might lose your family. You will not get to happiness that way. It's just not going to happen. So what you do need internally is the sustainable, clean, renewable energy. So if it's not fear that drives us, what is it going to be that drives us? The answer? Passion. Passion. What we love, what's in our heart, what's naturally us. And so if that's what we do, if that's what drives us, then even working hard doesn't drain us, because it's not covered in that toxic stress, worry, anxiety that even, depletes our performance. So we can perform better with less energy, if you will, that is completely sustainable, because it will never deplete the resources called me. So part of the Boundless Leadership edict is, how do we flip our drive from that toxic, fear-based energy to the more enlivening, nourishing, passion energy. So that's part of the basis of Boundless Leadership. That's a flip, by the way. One of the flips you had mentioned.
I was just going to ask you, is that what you meant by flip?
Right. It's the understanding. Correct.
I was hesitating whether or not to share this because I typically don't share in this way in these interviews, but I was witnessing, so I tend to, before an interview, I tend to experience a certain amount of anxiety, of stress-based energy. The amount of energy, rather, the amount of anxiety that I feel is inversely related to the amount of preparation that I do. So if I prepare a lot, then I will feel less anxiety. In this case, I didn't prepare much for our interview because I had prepared quite a bit for the interview with Dr. Loizzo last week, but still, nevertheless, I was witnessing myself leading up to today and even this morning prior to our interview, and I was having this very surreal experience. It was as if whatever aspects of me that want to line up to create this very prepared, robust, rigorous army front of tools in order to have this conversation flow very smoothly and intelligently, and for me to come across as well informed and prepared to lift you up and make you the center of the conversation versus me the center of the conversation. We're firing, we're going off like alarm bells or almost, but it wasn't hooking me as it typically does. It was this really wonderful experience of, there's this parallel current of alarm bells. You know what, Derik? Like, you better get your shit together right now, because you're about to jump into the ring, but you're not doing that. You're not doing what you typically do to get ready for one of these. What's wrong with you? I was having, for sure, this multiplicity of selves moment preparing for this, and I don't know where I'm going with this and how I'm going to segue this into something else, but I think.
Well, let me jump in, if I may, because I mean, first, what you just shared is phenomenal awareness, and the reason I want to comment about it is because where you were before this interview is a ledge that most of us, that's all we need to get to. Many of us believe that the idea is to never have stimuli that affect us or make us anxious or worry, or there's no performance-based stress, that I'd like to be like that. And some people are like that. I presume, I don't know what's in their minds, that maybe the Dalai Lama is like that, but so we think that that's the goal. But really, a very comfortable and much more helpful ledge than the one we tend to live on is the one that you described, which is, no, the anxiety came up, but I didn't buy into it. Yeah. I watched it, right? So it's a difference between, watching a horror movie and actually believing that the monsters are going to come get you, and seeing, oh, this is fun to watch, ha, 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 it's a movie. It's a completely different experience. So too in our life, being able to witness it and therefore not hooked by it is a very powerful position to be in. And we don't need to be at this sort of very fantasy-like view, oh, I will never have feelings of anxiety or fear or worry.
Absolutely.
That's my goal, right? So that's a beautiful place to be at. I'm so glad you experienced it and were able to share it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you pointed out that the goal is not an eradication of the experience of fear or anxiety. The goal is not to bypass unpleasant feelings. Rather, the goal is to work with them and excavate the gold on the ocean floor while also working with what's above the surface and just beneath the surface. And we're working with this interior realm all the time in our work lives, whether we know it or not. When I enter into a work context, I'm still me. I'm the same individual that I was before entering the work context. Though I may need to turn on or off or attenuate or monitor more closely certain aspects of myself, I still bring to the table my history, my conditioning, my beliefs, my biases, my privilege, my insecurities, and so on. And so how do you see the role of coach differing from the role of therapist? And where do you see the boundary being drawn in a business or a work environment?
Yeah, I think for both a coach and a therapist, it's going treasure hunting, if you will. I think the approaches might be different. I find as a coach myself, the biggest difference from having worked with different therapists personally is that there's more of this is like a trivial word, there's more of a homework approach. Like with therapy, at least my therapists, and I had different, so it's not just one modality. There's a sense of you, the patient, driving the conversation. There's a sense of you, the patient, doing it in your own time. And then there might be different degrees of dialogue with your therapist depending on the type of therapist. But in coaching, at least as I do coaching, there's a little bit more action oriented. So what are we going to do by next week? Like there's a specific set of behavior we want to have that is connected to the deeper conversation. But we're not here to understand. We're here to change, which is the goal for both.
That's a good point.
But and again, as I mentioned before, as a coach, it's above the surface, below the surface, and the ocean floor. You use all three interchangeably depending on the situation. Whereas therapy tends to want to get to the ocean floor, which is where the root of the issues are. It just takes longer, which is why some people are like, oh my God, it's been 2 years. And so they both have their value, but I just want to share how I thought they're different. But talking about this work as within business, okay, versus outside of business. So I think you're absolutely correct, Derik, that at the end of the day, it's the same individual. So whether you're in the office or you're at home, whether you're talking to your boss or you're talking to your partner or you're managing your employees or you're disciplining your kids, it's all the same you. So, when you're doing this kind of an inner reflective work, it's going to affect all parts of your life. In fact, I would say to you, the strongest testimonial that I have received, and this is like, now it's my gold standard. I try to again. I do generally well to not have this be about my ego, but we all kind of like a very authentic testimonial. And so my gold standard now is we're all human, exactly. Because now I've heard it several times from my clients, is when the testimonial comes from my client's partner. Mm-hmm. Tell Elazar he's doing a great job. And I'm like, wow, because that individual, we're focused at work, of course, but that's the same individual that goes home. Another partner is witnessing somebody who's showing up a little differently at home. So to your point, it's the same person inside or outside the office. But three things happen inside the office, right? It doesn't change the principles. It's like, one's driving a car and the other one's driving a truck. They're the same principles on the same roads, but they're slightly different. So what happens at work is, in addition to it being about the person, there's slightly more structure around power plays. Oh, my boss can fire me. There's more structure around hierarchy, around it's a pyramid. So one day the music's going to stop and there's one less chair. Who's going to be left standing? Oh my God, I don't want it to be me. So the pressure inside of business of driving us is a little bit stronger. The other thing that makes business different is that although it's true as an individual, we can change the world. And we've seen many individuals throughout history do that. And we could certainly change our family and our neighbors and our community. So there's this ever-growing circle. But inside of a business, we can affect people's livelihood, their view of themselves, who then they go out to their families and their communities with that view of how we help them see themselves. And then we as a business have different missions that affects what we do. The products we sell affect consumers in different ways. The way we resource those products affects the planet. So if we're shifting ourselves, it's the same person in and out of work. So that doesn't change. But if we're doing it inside of business, it has a slightly wider impact, because businesses as a whole have so much power and impact in society, both in how we treat our workers and how we treat our customers, and what our mission is between, profitability versus, giving back to communities. It's massive. So it just changes the weight, but doesn't change the essence.
Yeah, the stakes are high.
Yeah.
For this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces of feedback from some of the work that we're doing internally with our team, is when a particular team member says, my wife really thanks Glo for the work that we're doing here.
That's so beautiful, isn't it?
It truly is.
Yeah.
I said this in the interview with Dr. Loizzo. You write about heroism briefly in the book, and that being an ordinary person in an extraordinary situation, that we don't have to be special to inspire. We have to be in a special place within our nervous system, and then it's a way of leading without needing to impress or intimidate. And I said it then, and I want to say it again. I've seen some of the more courageous acts of heroism, via team members, who have taken and are taking the journey of sitting in that fire of uncomfortable vulnerability, instead of what you're referring to is existing within or being driven by that stress-charged energy of shame, anger, and fear.
Yeah.
I want to drill down on fear a little bit. Something that, I think as teams are in this kind of liminal transition phase, you can imagine on one end of the spectrum, a more fully realized of what you're referring to, and then on the other end of the spectrum, a completely unconscious culture. And then, as a team evolves and endeavors to do this work, you're going to have different people evolving at different paces or different speeds. Typically, the fear of being found out ultimately has in it encoded the likelihood that you're going to self-sabotage. Like you're going to, because of that fear, you're going to create the very conditions or situation that you fear might happen. So one of the things that we try to work with is, how do we create the conditions to allow that particular individual to fear less being found out? Because by hiding the thing that one is hiding, it will likely come to the surface anyway at some point. And so why don't we just have the conversation before that happens?
Yeah. And even if it doesn't come up to the surface, it is limiting what you can do because you're spending that energy hiding it. So everybody's at a different place. And even the same person is at a different place on a different day, right?
Yeah.
So this thing is not so linear.
Right.
But what you said something that's very powerful. You said, creating the conditions, right? So that's our job as a leader, to create the conditions. It's not our job to change the people.
Right.
It's our job to provide the support that they need to make the change that they want.
Right.
So we need to understand both our power and have humility over our limitations in the situation. The second thing is that, in my experience, one of the most powerful ways of creating conditions is modeling. And so if we can be honest and vulnerable ourselves, people really kind of hear that, and it allows them to take a little bit more risk, to be a little bit more vulnerable. But again, we're not telling them to be vulnerable. We're inviting them to feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And I just want to pause there, because the thing I just said, if I were to say anything to leaders, and I've been consulting and I've been coaching two very different ways of working with leaders, startup companies, corporations, nonprofits, it doesn't make a difference. The number one thing, the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is to create a sense of safety in your organization. If you can create the condition of safety, then everything else will naturally flow towards what is possible and not what we need to be careful of. It'll just happen naturally. It is the lack of sense of safety that causes us to shut down, put on our masks, and behave in ways that are very self-protective and therefore, by definition, not communal, because it's about me and not us. Safety takes that all away.
Right.
But I do want to say one third point, Derik, because I think this is on the good news side of things. Many times, clients, especially if they're CEOs and leaders of large organizations, say, how do I change them? The work you and I have done is so great, but how do you do it to them? I want to change the whole organization, right? It's 1,000 people. I'm going to change 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is, and I'm going to share numbers with you, but I have to tell you, this is purely anecdotal. This is my numbers, okay? But these are numbers that seem to have held throughout the years with different data points from different perspectives. The thing is, you don't have to change them all. You just need to change 20% of them. 60% of them will follow. And the other 20% don't belong with where you're going.
And will typically
you just have to let them go.
Out.
They'll mostly will self-select out, and sometimes you kind of want to encourage them if needed, But don't worry, the 60% majority is not yours to change. They will follow when that 20% does the change. And it's not hierarchical. It's not, I got to do it from the top. No, you just got to do 20%.
We could do a whole interview just on that topic. And
there have been several of those topics.
Several of those topics. And I think
fear just by itself is a big topic. Yes.
Yeah. I want to stay on psychological safety for a moment. I think you're referring to Dr. Amy Edmondson's psychological safety, which was made popular by Google's Project Aristotle. And also, I highly recommend Dr. Edmondson's recent book, The Fearless Organization. That I found that term is easily misunderstood, which she's also written extensively about that, how easily it's misunderstood. And I can add a link to that in the show notes. But I just want to underscore here that psychological safety is not about lowering performance standards, or it's not another word for trust. It's not about being nice. There's much more to it. And also, the absence of toxicity in a team is not evidence of cultural health either. Really, at its core, it's a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for taking interpersonal risks, or that individuals feel safe ultimately to take interpersonal risks. And it doesn't mean that I'm safe to do whatever I want. And I want to be clear here that I think the safety you're referring to is a safety within the mutual shared understanding of who we are as a team, how we operate together as a team, what is values aligned and what isn't. It doesn't mean an immunization from being fired, but only if, as a last resort, the firing is then done with kindness and along with all the systems and communication habits in place, such that that undesirable event is not a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolute safety doesn't mean, you can do whatever you want, right? Because actually, by definition, that means somebody else isn't going to feel safe because you're walking around doing whatever you want. So yeah, it's that. But it isn't also just about the alignment around values. That's sort of a way to it, but it's not its essence. Its essence is that, yes, you can get fired without question, but the caring that I have for you as a human being doesn't go away because I'm firing you.
That's right.
My concern for you doesn't change because you're no longer my employee.
That's right.
That's the safety, because I could get fired and don't feel rejected, or I could stay in the company and actually feel rejected. So it's the sense of my worth being rejected is what I want to avoid at all costs. That is one version, one definition of not being safe, because I can be rejected at my core worth.
Right.
I'm not safe. So when you allow that to never arise, because that's not who we are as an organization or as a leader or as a culture, then the safety starts coming in. And you see its benefits inside a business other than, I'd like to speak about a similar conversation to safety, which, I had to deal with some years ago, the idea of kindness and compassion. And I'm telling you, the number one response repeatedly was, at least it started off with, "Are you kidding me? This is a dog-eat-dog world, and you're trying to tell me to be kind? They'll eat my lunch if I'm kind. You don't understand business." And I said, well, actually, I do. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a successful executive. I understand it. But kindness is not sweetness. It's not about the attitude of Yahoo, let's all be nice. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's not what we're describing. Kindness is similar to the definition of safety. It's you need firmness is kind. You can't not let people know where they stand. That's not kind.
Absolutely.
That's not safe. You need the truthful, direct, difficult conversations. But the difference is that I'm in it with you to help you. I'm not holding you apart from me and saying you don't belong to us because your performance is just not who we are. I'm not rejecting you. I'm just saying, hey, you have a fever of 102. That means you need to stay in bed and I'll bring you, chicken soup. But you got to know you have a fever of 102.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be kind about how you handle your fever. So it's actually, there's a lot of toughness that you need because it takes radical honesty to be kind and to be able to deliver the difficult news without making the other person feel like there's something wrong with them. That's high level, kindness. Same thing with safety. Same conversation, I believe.
I agree. And I appreciate your use of the word kindness. We now have 3 core values at Glo, and each of them have 3 supporting key behaviors. And in terms of kindness, one of our core values is nurture kindness, whose then 3 key behaviors are seek clarity, call each other out and in, and venture to be vulnerable. And I want to switch gears slightly. Can you speak to the larger picture of how your book is like a map for transformation?
So the thing about the book is there's a lot of information in it. You know, my colleague and co-author Joe Loizzo is a renowned scientist, psychotherapist. So he brings a lot of information and knowledge into the book. But the book is not about giving you more information so you could share some nice facts at the cocktail party. The book is based on a program. The program of transformation that it's based on came before the book. The purpose of the book is not to download information. The purpose of the book is to help you change to whatever degree that you're seeking to change, but to show you the way for that change, the path that will work, and whatever version of it that you want to customize so that you can walk on that path to whatever degree you want to move on it. It'll still take you further than where you are. And that further isn't to greater success. I just want to be clear about that. It's further to greater freedom inside your job, inside your business. It's further to your degree of responsibility as a human on this planet and what your team and your business can do. It's further to your degree of finding meaning and purpose in your job and your life. It's further into integrating who you are as a human being with what you do as a professional. It's further in those areas. Not like I now can get promoted faster. I just don't want to mislead any of your listeners to say I can, rise up the organization faster because I read this book.
Yeah, I would say in a culture where the culture values the evolution that you're referring to, I would argue that you could actually evolve quicker within that organization, whatever that means, whether it be a title change or more responsibility or a salary increase or other specific. I'd say if the team values what it is that you're presenting in this book, for example,
right?
I see it happen on our team, for example. Like if you're endeavoring to do this hard work, good things will come. It may not be, like you said, in accordance with, say, conventional success metrics, but it will likely come in accordance with the other more sort of human interaction metrics that are core to what we're discussing here today.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct. And they can even come in the more traditional success metrics of more money, bigger job. It could do that. All I was saying is that's not the why of it.
Correct.
That's definitely an outcome, because if you're at your peak performance, more of success will just be more accessible to you and with less effort. But what drives it is not the fact that I want more of that. What drives it is the understanding that for me to be more of service as a human being is going to serve me better and serve me both as a leader and as an individual.
Right.
In fact, that's a way one can define each of the paths. And this is definitely a conversation in business. Thank God that it's a growing conversation in business. But one path, the traditional path, the path that I grew up, becoming a successful executive but always struggling with, I call that the egoic path. That's the path that feeds my ego, because I have this confused understanding that if I have enough success, I will get to happiness. So I'm going to feed my ego to become successful because that will make me happy. But the path that we're talking about, boundless leadership, is the path of service, which is sort of the complete opposite. It's the polar opposite of the egoic path, is the path of service. That I'm not the only, it's not an us and them, there's only an us. And the better I make the us, the better it is for me. As opposed to the egoic path that says that the only me that can really not just survive, but flourish is an I that stands apart from the all others. So making that flip as another flip is another fundamental is another fundamental principle of boundless leadership.
I've experienced in myself, and others have shared with me, the more that we show up in this way together, the greater the experience of flow and healthy and helpful interactions. And it just feels good. And because of that, we begin to want more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a very good point, is that when we taste it, we want more of it. So that's what's going to fuel it. That's what's going to make it grow, not a book or, somebody pontificating about it. It's the direct experience that it's a lot more freeing and a lot more fulfilling than just trying to be the best out of the lot.
Yeah.
And that is one of the smaller flips. The biggest flip, the biggest flip is the flip that you want to basically approach a situation, not from the kind of conditioned and frankly genetic and evolutionary training of protecting ourselves for survival. You want to flip it and approach most situations from a much more expansive, safe feeling of opportunity, abundance, and therefore sharing. So you want to flip your perspective, your fundamental perspective, from one to the other. That's a big flip. You do it by going inside and not trying to change the outside world, because we all know how fruitless that is. And then inside of that, there are a bunch of smaller flips. One of them that we just talked about is flipping ego for service. Another one that, you brought up in some of your conversation is flipping process for outcome, right? We can't control the outcome, which is what we all focus on, especially in business, quarterly goals, numbers, this or that. But we actually, in reality, cannot control it. What we can control 100% is our process, how we show up, who we are when we're taking something on. What part of self-awareness and clarity are we bringing? All of that process we can manage and control, frankly. Another flip, which is very powerful, especially in business, and this is one I work with. I work with all of these, but this is one that has the most immediate impact, is flipping fear for compassion. You're walking into a meeting and you're going to meet with an aggressive boss or a board member or an investor, and they're just, that they're aggressive and they, in your mind, don't even like you. You're going to walk in with a lot of anxiety, some fear, and you're ready to take it on to the best of your ability and practice and what have you. But instead of that, to flip it to compassion, understanding that individual is another lost soul, just like you, trying to be happy, thinks he knows it, but he actually doesn't, and makes it up and hides it. And oops, he's not that different from all these other lost souls we know. And have compassion for that. That meeting will change completely. The tenor of that meeting will be something very different from what you would have experienced otherwise. So those are some other flips.
And in that moment of compassion for the other, also a reminder to practice compassion for myself, since I'm likely in that kind of situation, setting in motion automatically and subconsciously a cascade of emotional responses that are designed to meet my needs in the presence of an aggressive person. So changing topics slightly, I'm curious what you think of the cult of busyness. for example, like the addiction to being busy or the need to appear as busy, and how that relates to authenticity.
I love the term of cult of busyness. Honestly, I've never heard of it before, and I think it's really quite wonderful. But it's funny because it used to be a cult of busyness. It used to be when I was in business back in the 90s or late 80s, you were proud to be busy. You were a warrior because you only had 3 hours sleep, or you're managing 12 projects, or you're flying around the world. And it's just what, real successful people did. So there really was a cult around being that kind of individual who works hard and plays hard, right? Fortunately, a lot of that has died down. Fortunately, the trends are moving towards a little bit more sustainable practices, or no, sleep matters. I actually get 8 hours sleep. Yahoo me. Self-care is important. I am the greatest asset in this situation for me. How do I, invest in and secure and build this asset? So I think that there is a lot of that has shifted, which is a good movement. However, the idea that we actually are busy because of the digital overload, we no longer know how to handle that, because we're so people can contact us 24/7, certainly with emails, but that's already too slow. We have Slack, we have text. So, we're constantly have to be vigilant around seeing which email or which text is out there that's going to get us. We don't want to miss it. We can't really enjoy our vacations because, oh my God, I have 1,000 emails when I get back to work. I can't even have fun now. So this idea of being on digital overload is no longer the cult idea that it's cool to be a warrior. But most of us don't know how to remain comfortable and confident if we're not on top of every single piece of information, and yet none of us can be on top of every single piece of information. So there are obviously some practices that many business coaches can teach about priorities or time management, but in this book and in this interview, we're not talking about that. We're talking about developing the ability to have the confidence that you can handle that which you don't see yet. The trick is not, as a leader, to believe you know how to do it all. The trick as a leader is to believe that you can figure it out when you need to, because if you were to be honest about it, you've done that 1,000 times already. So this cult of busyness, as far as actually being too busy because there's just so much information, is best addressed through the idea that you don't have to be on top of everything. You just need to figure out how to solve a problem when it arises, and getting your confidence on that. But the cult being defined as looking a certain way, is just that will only reinforce your false belief that you're not good enough the way you are. So how are you going to fake it? And that faking it will never leave you, no matter how much you rise up the ranks. So it just isn't going to serve you. And, authenticity always wins out anyway.
Sometimes the desire to look busy and be busy can lead to a lack of focus on the very things that are actually going to move the needle.
Exactly. It's just you're approaching a situation with a lot of your mind energy focused on how are you going to be perceived, and therefore not enough of your mind energy in how are you going to do this well.
Exactly.
So you're kind of working against yourself. You're saying, I have so much to do, but I'm going to put 30% of my time on something that isn't going to move any of my projects. Really? So why would you want to work a 70% capacity when you feel you have so much to do anyway?
Right. Because it feels good. And decreases the likelihood that I won't be loved or safe or belong.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's one other thing about this, looking busy. This idea of inauthenticity, therefore the idea of authenticity. When we're able to be authentic, something really powerful happens. It allows the other people to exhale, to relax, to say, I don't have to fake it either. And at the end of the day, you want to follow the leader who makes you feel better about yourself, not the leader that is constantly beating you up, putting you down. You want to follow the leader that says it's okay to be you, not the leader that says we have a certain, threshold of, Navy SEALs only in this company. So, as a leader, it's powerful, but as a human being, it allows the other person to put down their defenses. It allows the other person to bring out their best. And that's the, greatest thing you could accomplish as a leader.
Right. It doesn't mean that you're not asking your leader to not challenge you and to push beyond some limits because we're innovating here, for example. I think sometimes that can be confused.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're correct, because you brought up that point a few times, right? About safety, about kindness, about authenticity. The bottom line is that making others better takes effort. You can't just be sweet about it.
Right.
Making others better takes discipline, takes consistency, takes commitment. But doing it inside of an environment that says, I got your back, is a different environment than the one that says, I'm looking to see where you're going to fail because that's my job. I get rid of the ones that fail. You still need to get rid of the ones that do not fit, are not performing, without question. But your approach to it doesn't have to be, that's my job. Your approach to it has to be, my job is to make you the best you can be. And if the best you can be is still not good enough for this company, then we both failed, but our heart was in it, and we part ways in a caring way. So, your leader, you still are the leader of the organization, and your loyalties are to that whole organism, but you perfect the organism by working with each individual, becoming their best, and hence the total becomes the best. But when the two are at odds, your loyalties are kind of clear.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's an environment where we may be sharing with each other information that the other may not want to hear, but it's in an environment that's safe, an environment where we're learning and growing together, and that we're in service of each other. But that doesn't mean we shy away from delivering and receiving information we may not want to hear or that we may not want to address.
Correct. I'll put some real statistics to that. So, and this is in the book, but in communications, they've shown that there are three aspects of communications, content, i.e. words, tone, and what they call body language, what Joe and I call energy. So it turns out that in communications, the numbers are that 17% is content, the words, 32% is your tone, and 51% is your body language / energy. So you could be firing somebody or you could be promoting somebody. Those are words. It's only 17% of the communication. Where is your heart at the time? Where is your energy at the time? That's what's really being heard, not the words. Mm-hmm. And so that's the job of the leaders, to focus on the 51% that is actually being received and not the 49% that is what is being said or heard. So, back to this whole idea, whether it's safety, authenticity, kindness, the words are still the words that need to communicate to get the best performance for the company. but the tonality or the energy is what you really need to fine tune, because that's what really is received.
Yeah. And in your book, I love how you speak about that concept under the empowered responsibility chapter, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, that ultimately to get there assumes really a deep level of comfort with our own vulnerability and authenticity. And that as leaders, we must be accountable for the subtle impact our intentions have on our behavior as well as the behavior of others, which I love that.
Right.
Like, to be constantly thinking like how is the way that I'm behaving going to impact someone else?
Yeah.
As you said, not just verbally, but non-verbally and energetically.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a supplement client, and the big game in supplements is not what supplements you take, it's what supplements you assimilate that makes a difference, right? So it's not the words you're giving people, it's what they're hearing, what they're metabolizing. And that goes way beyond words.
I love that. Was there anything else you want to say about the book or the upcoming leadership program?
As I mentioned before, the book is based on a program we've run for some years now, and it's a once-a-year cohort. The next one actually is in February 2022. So there you not only get the hands-on, not just the information, of course, but the hands-on talking, but you also get the group environment that you mentioned, Derik, where people are able to hear other people and sort of go on the journey together, this journey of transformation. So, we're very excited to have another one in a few months.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It's a very powerful experience. The other thing that I want to mention after the bit that you gave about your book, I want to call out too that what is powerful about the practices you provide, they're relatively short meditations, and each of them differ in the middle of the meditation where you're inviting the reader to work on a particular skill or competency, which I think it's really powerful, and it's not simple or basic, but it's accessible.
Right. Well, thank you for saying that. Each one is precisely matched to the quality we're building. And each one is both proven contemplatively throughout a long history, but also now with neuroscience of how it actually does what it's supposed to do. And therefore, make the pairing so much more powerful.
So tell me how people can find you and the book and more information.
Yeah, so you could just go to my website, elazaraslan.com, and you'll have access to the book, learn a little bit more about the program or some of my programs with individuals and companies.
Elazar, thank you so much. I am passionate about this topic, and I've been excited about my conversations with both you and Dr. Loizzo, and I highly recommend your book. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I truly do believe that too many of us are suffering needlessly, and there's a way out, and it's not as difficult as it sounds, and it's doable. So I hope at least some of your listeners get a little bit something out of this. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you to our entire team behind the scenes at Glo. I'm so grateful for your care and commitment to serving our members around the world. Thank you to our teachers for so beautifully sharing your gifts and talents. I'm also grateful to our lovely community of Glo members. You've supported us since 2008, and because of you, we get to continue to do the work we love. It's the combined support of our team, our teachers, and our community that grants me the privilege to continue to bring you the Glo Podcast. Thank you to Lee Schneider, our Red Cub agency, for production support. And the beautiful music you're hearing now is by Carrie Rodriguez and her husband, Luke Jacobs. And remember, take care of yourself because our world needs you. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. You can find the Glo Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or glo.com/podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Derik Mills.